And now we're on Daf Mem Heyamid Beis. Shema Yizgaru Ba Pirchei Kahuna. The Gemara explains why, according to Rav Shimon Shizuri, the Torah excluded Nazira as far as Tiglachas, the Pesach Ol Moed, because we're afraid that the Pirchei Kahuna, those Kohanim who are there in the Mikdash doing the Avodah, might be Misgara, because that's an open place called Pesach Ol Moed. And if she will cut her hair off, then it might cause the wrong thoughts to cross their mind. And the Gemara is going to now reject Rav Shimon Shizuri. Omar Lo, Abba Hanan says to Rav Shimon Shizuri, Lidvarecha, what are we going to do with the Sota? If you're afraid of Shema Yizgaru Ba, what about the Sota Tochiach? T'ksiv Ba, and it says regard to the Sota, again in Parshas Nasa, V'midah Lifnei Hashem, and Lifnei Hashem is always interpreted at the Azara, and that's a place that's Golui, that's Befar Hesia. V'lo Chayshin and Shema Yizgaru Ba Pirchei Kahuna. I mean, in the case of a Sota, it could be even more arousing because it's Rosh Megula, and not only that, they did a Bedika, and they were Megalis Liba, Sosrim as Kliya Sara, and Mesirim Mimenes Tachshitera. All this is recorded in Sota Daf Zayin. So we see that the Pirchei Kuna are involved in the Avoda, and we don't have to suspect that they'll have the wrong thoughts. Marlahem, Rav Shimon Shizuri responds, and he says the following: you don't derive conclusions from Sota, because in Sota there's an additional element in the process of Hashkas Sota, and that's called Nivel. Whereas here, in the case of a Nazira, there's no din of Nivel. Zu, the Nazira is Kocheles Upokeses. She does all her cosmetics, and there's no reason to enjoin her from doing so, and that might lead to Shema Yizgaru Ba Pirchei Kahuna. But Zu, in the case of a Sota, Eina Kocheles Upokeses. On the contrary, her kiyum is Nivel. You know, we're hoping that she'll maybe confess that she was guilty, and then there won't have to be the whole process of Hashkas Sota. So we're not choshesh for Yizgaru Ba in the case of the Pirchei Kahuna when it's Nivel. Now you see clearly from this Gemara that Rav Shimon Shizuri is not darshaning a full-fledged drush of Nazir below Nazira. I mean, if so, the Gemara didn't have to go through all this shakla v'tarya to decide whether it would be Megara, wouldn't be Megara. And apparently very often the Torah uses the masculine form, but it refers even to a female. So how do you, Rav Shimon Shizuri, know for sure that the word Nazir is exclusive to a male Nazir? And the answer is because Shema Yizgaru Ba Pirchei Kahuna. And this leads us to the Mishnah here, the first of the two Mishnayos on the top of Daf Mem Heyamid Beis. Hoyenotel Sa'arosh Nizro, after he did the Tiglachas, the Nazir will grab onto the Sar, Umeshaleach, and he throws it Tachas Adud underneath this big, large pot where they cook the shlomim. And underneath the pot, obviously, there's a fire, and that's where his seir is going to be burned. So this is going on in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Lishkas HaNazirim. But the Mishnah points out that that's a lechatchila, that's an ideal situation. But in Gilach b'Medina, oh, I'm sorry, we didn't get to the rest of Yerushalayim yet. That's going to be a b'diavad. But in Gilach b'Medina, outside of Yerushalayim, which means that the Giluach itself could take place anywhere. It doesn't have to be in Yerushalayim. And even though it says V'Gilach HaNazir Pesach Ol Moed, we already explained that according to all the Tanoim, with the exception of Shimon Shizuri, it means not Pesach Ol Moed Mamish Kipshuto, but rather B'chol Mokom. And it only refers to the Korban. So an event that he was Megalech b'Medina, according to this Tana, And we'll soon see other Tanoim that reject this opinion. He would not have to schlep his seir from wherever he was, from Dan to Beersheba to the Beis Hamikdash, to burn it under the pot of the Korban Shlomim. But Medvar Mamurim, when do we say that there's halacha of burning the seir under the dud of the Shlomim? That's only the Tiglachas the Tara. This is the Tiglachas that concludes Nazirus under no situations when he did not contract Tumah. Abel Tiglachas Tumah, in the case of a Nazir, who during the course of his Nazirus he contracted Tumah, and he needs to be Mitayr himself from his Tumah. And the Torah requires in that process of Tara, L'galech es Sa'ara, and to bring his karbanos for the fact that he was Nitma, his lawyer, Mishalech Tachas Adud. The Nazir Tameh brings a korban Asham and a korban Chatos. There's no din of Shiluach HaSeir, of thrusting the hair underneath the dud of the Asham or the Chatos. That din only applies to a Nazir Tahar, and it only applies to a case where he was Megaleach in Yerushalayim. Reb Meir Omer, now we have the dissenting view of Rabbi Meir, Hakol, all Nazim, whether it's Tar or Tameh, Mishalchin Tachas Adud, they will burn their seir underneath the dud. Again, if we're talking about a Nazir Tahar, so we're talking about under the dud of Shlomim. If we're talking about a Nazir Tameh, then we're talking about under the dud of either the Asham or the Chatos. Hakol mishalchim tachas adud. So even a Nazir Tameh requires tachas adud in the sreifa of his seir. But now let's ask a different question. Okay, so Rabbi Meir, you're extending the scope of the requirement of sreifa tachas adud to include even a Nazir Tameh under the dud of the Chatos and the Asham. But wait a minute, where did the Giluach take place? And here's where Rabbi Meir concedes that there's a difference between a Nazir Tar v'siyum Naziru, so in a Nazir Tameh. And he says, Chutz min atameh shebimedina bilvad. This is what I call the two strikes against you, not three, but two, and that's enough. Number one, he's a Nazir Tameh. And number two, he did the tiglachas outside of Yerushalayim b'Medina. If he has those two strikes against him, then there's no din, according to Rabbi Meir, of shiluach tachas adud. But in the case of tiglachas tahara, whether he did that tiglachas in Yerushalayim or outside Yerushalayim, in the case of tiglachas tumah, an event that he performed the giluach in Yerushalayim, then is the din of shiluach tachas adud. So if we calculate the nafkamina between the Tanakama of our Mishnah and Rabbi Meir, what are the differences? So first of all, with regard to a Nazir Tara, there's an nafkamina because the Tanakama says that there's no din of shiluach if the tiglachas took place in Medina. Whereas Rabbi Meir says in a tiglachas Tara, it doesn't matter where the tiglachas was, the Nazir has to schlep his seir all the way up through the Harbayis to the Mikdash and put the hair underneath the Shlom. Now we have a second nafkamina between the Tanakam and Rabbi Meir, and that's the case of a Nazir Tameh. Rabbi Meir holds that if the tiglachas of the Nazir Tameh took place in Yerushalayim, then he requires shiluach for the sreifa, tachas adud. And that means under the Asham or the Chatos. If, on the other hand, the Nazir Tameh performed his tiglachas outside of the bounds of Yerushalayim, then there's no din of shiluach tachas adud. So we have two cases where both Rabbi Meir and the Tanakam agree In one case, we do require shiluch. In one case, we do not. L'kuli alma. In the case of a Nazir tar who performed his tiglachas in Yerushalayim, then both the Tanakama and Rebbe Meir agree that there's a requirement of shiluach tachas hadud underneath the dud of the shlomim. And on the other polar extreme, in a case of a Nazir Tameh who brings his chatas v'yosham and he did his tiglachas outside Yerushalayim, both Rabbi Meir and the Chacham agree that there's no requirement of shiluach haseir. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah, Notel Sar Rosh Nizro, Tan Rabbon V'Yachaka. After the Giluach of the Nazir, Sarisham Notel Es Harotev. Okay, we're going to derive from a special ribui in the pasuk that they're going to pour something from the pot onto the seir before they thrust it into the fire. Of course, they're not going to take out the shlomim themselves, because you're not allowed to be mafsid kodshim by throwing it into the fire. But the rotev, the juices that came out of the shlom, they don't have the same status, and therefore you're allowed to throw them into the fire. No saying. And first you pour it over the sarosh nizro, on the cut hair of the nazir, and then mishalech tachas hadud shel shlom. Then he thrusts it underneath the dud into the fire. But I'm wondering what the flammability was here after he added the rotev to his seir. I mean, the whole thing, what kind of smell it had, and so forth and so on. Im shilach tachas hadud shel chatas v'yosham. In the case of a Nazir Tameh, and this is reflecting the Shita of Rabbi Meir, who requires shiluach tachas hadud and chatas v'yosham of a Tameh, then Yotza. Now, if it's referring to a Nazir Tar, then this is impossible. Nazir Tar will bring 3 karbanas, a chatas, a shlomim, and an ola, but he doesn't bring an asham. That's only for Nazir Tameh. And Nazir Tameh himself, whether it's a din of shiluach tachas hadud, is a machlokes between the Tanakama of Mishnah and Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara immediately asks on this brisa, Asham Nazir Tar mi'ika, assuming that this brisa, for argument's sake, is referring to a Nazir Tar. And I guess the reason why the Havamina thought it was a Nazir Tar is because, it doesn't qualify. He should have mentioned it was a Nazir Tameh if it was Rabbi Meir. So then what's going on over here that the Mishnah says, the Brisa says that Shiluach Tachas Hadud Shel Chatas, the Asham, there is no Asham in the case of a Nazir Tar, Amarava, Chikamar, in Nazir Tameh, Mishaleach Ha Tachas Hadud Shel Asham, the Yotza. So this would have to be reflective of the Shita of Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir is the one who holds that there's a din of shiluach tachas hadud, even in the case of a Nazir Tameh, as long as he did his tiglacha somewhere in the environs of Yerushalayim. The only thing that bothers me here is it sounds like Yotze b'di'evet. Why is this only b'di'evet? Maybe l'chatchila he should have done it to the chatos, perhaps. So now the Gemara says, Minani Mili. This whole business that is codified here in the Brisa, Tanarabana Notel Sarotev, where does that come from? What's the source in the Torah that he puts the Rotev from the Shlomim onto the Seir Nazir before he thrusts it underneath the Dud into the fire? Marava Makra. There's a ribui in the pasuk it says, "V'lakaches sa'ar rosh nizro v'nosan alo esha shetachas zevach hashlomin." I mean, there's an obvious redundant, superfluous word here, zevach hashlom. Why did the pasuk add the word zevach? And the answer is mizivcho yehei tachtov. Take something from the zevach. And what do you do with that something from the zevach? Which we say is the rotev, and you put it tachtov, you put it underneath the shlom. The shlom is in the pot, and the rotev is taken out of the pot, and it's going to go underneath the pot, namely into the eish. And that's why the Torah adds the word zevach to teach us that the zevach, or at least part of the zevach, also has to go into the fire together with his seir. Now again, we have an Easter hefsek kodshim, so that cannot refer to the shlom itself, because the shlom is roy lachila and zakiv mitzvah of liachlu osam asher kupar b'hem. So it must be referring by process of elimination to the rotev. The Brisa says, "V'imshilach tachsa dud shel chatos yotza my taima." Okay, so now we're going back to the case of a Nazir tahar, and he should have thrust his hair into the pot of the shlomim, meaning after they brought the korban shlomim, then he should have done his tiglachas. But instead, he did it after the korban chatas, which is one of the three korbanos. Now that's okay, according to Reb Lazar, wherever it is, right? But we're going now according to the Chachamim. So the Gemara now is going to derive a pasuk that b'di'eved, if it was done after the chatos, he was yotzei. Omakar zevach, right? Zevach implies any korban. Stam, it's a generic term. Lav dafka shlomim, l'rabos chatos v'yosham. Again, chatos in the case of a nazir tar, and osham could only be in the case of nazir tameh, and as we said before, reflecting the shita of Rabbi Meir. But once again, I'm not exactly sure if osham refers to a tameh. I'm going to ask the same question I asked earlier. Why is that only b'di'eved? I guess because chatchili require chatos. I'm not sure. So the Gemara now asks, I need the word zevach for something else. You can't learn two things from one pasuk. Va'fikte lahai zevach mi rotev. Right? So the Torah says that now you're learning from the word zevach that any zevach is okay, and b'di'eved it could be even the chatas and the osham. And b'di'eved you could place the seir and burn it under the chatas of the osham, and that's what you're deriving from the generic term zevach. But I need the word zevach to teach me zevach, meaning merotev. So in its very typical style, the Gemara says sometimes you can learn two things from one pasuk by being medayik in the language of the pasuk. Im kein lema kra. If the Torah is only coming to teach me with the word zevach, that you add the rotev of the shlomim into the seir before you thrust it into the fire, is then the Torah should have said me rotev ashlomim. Why confuse us? You're referring to the rotev, say outright rotev. My zevach. There must be some sort of a hint over here that adding the word zevach is teaching me something else. Not just rotev, because then it would have said explicitly rotev ashlomim. Shma minola rabos chatos v'osham. The chatos of a nazir Torah, the osham of a nazir tameh. Second. Okay, now let's just see if by any chance. No, I can't figure it out. Why is this b'di'evet in the case of the Asham? I'm not sure about that. I'm sure there's a note here, but I don't see it. In fact, the Gemara v'ema kula. Maybe the entire drush of Zevach is coming l'chatas l'yashim u'diyasa. How do I know to derive the conclusion then that you take mi Zevach, the rotev, and you put it on the seir and you burn it under the fire? Maybe the ribui of this generic term Zevach is only telling us that the Eved Yotze with the chatas and the yashim. And where it says in Cain, lema shlomim v'zevach. The pasuk should have said v'nasan tachas shlomim v'zevach, which would mean either shlomim or another zevach. But my zevach hashlomim. Zevach hashlomim implies that he's taking something from the zevach hashlomim, and that's a special ribui to derive the rotev shmamino tarte. And therefore, we could derive from the extra word two different dinim. In every case of a tar or a tameh, then at the time of the giluach, whether the giluach took place in Yerushalayim or outside Yerushalayim, they would be mishaleach tachsadud. However, in the case of a Nazir Tameh, if he was megaleach b'Medina, he doesn't send it to the dud. Mipnei she'sa'aro nikbar divrei Rabbi Meir. Now, Tosfos says that there doesn't seem to be a source for the fact that Si'oro Nikbar, in the case of a Tomei Chutz L'Yerushalayim, meaning in the Medina. However, the Keren Orah points out he doesn't understand Tosfos because the Gemara in Tmura on Daf Lamed Gimel and Beis mentions that the Ser Rosh HaNazir is included in a whole list there of Isurei Hana. And the law, the status of Isurei Hana is such that it requires Kvura. Kedei shelo yikolshu yichshalu v'yehenu mihem. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Tahorim kan v'kan hayu mishalchim. In the case of a Nazir Tor, who implements his tiglachas at the end of his nazirus, it makes no difference whether his giluach was in Yerushalayim or outside of Yerushalayim. He would have to bring the ser and put it under the shlomim, the sear of the shlomim in the fire. However, tmeim kan v'kan loyim mishalchim. It matters not whether Nazir Tomei did his tiglachas as part of his process of Tara in Yerushalayim, out of Yerushalayim. It matters not where the giluch took place, and lo hayu mishalchim is no din of shiluach. The Chachamim omrim hakol lo hayu mishalchim tachsadud chutz mitor shebemigdash. The Chachamim here quoted in this brisa are the exact polar opposite of Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah. Rabbi Meir said in 3 out of 4 cases there is a din of a requirement of shiluah, and the Chacham is saying in 3 or 4 cases there's no requirement of shiluah. There's only one case where you have to check off 2 boxes when, according to the Chacham of the Brisa, there would be a requirement of shiluah. Tachas Saidud Shel Hashlamim, and that's only number 1 if he was a Nazir Tar, and number 2, his giluach was in Migdash. Now, this is a pella. We never saw such a shita that requires giluach in the Migdash. We said that giluach could be anywhere, and all of Yerushalayim has one din. Mipnei shenasa kimitzvaso. This is the perfect ideal lechatchilu way of fulfilling the mitzvah tiglachas. In the case of Nazir Torah, B'siyim Naziruso, and he does it in the Migdash, in the Lishkas HaNazirim. Now it says, "V'lakach es se'ar rosh nizro v'nasan ala eish," and it implies that the giluach of the se'ar, until the point of Sreifa, all he does is Lekicha and Nesin, as we discussed on Omen Aleph. But if he's Megaleach Chutz LaMigdash, then he's going to have to bring them all the way to Yerushalayim. But what does the word Migdash mean? So I believe that the word Migdash here refers to Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is called Migdash. I heard from my Rebbe many times, based on the Rambam Pirush Mishnayos, that the Kedusha of Migdash expands to include all of Yerushalayim. So the word Migdash here is referring to Kedushas Yerushalayim. And now we're on the second Mishnah here on Daf Mem Hey Amud Beis. He has two options. He could either do a classic bishul of the Shlomim, or he could do Shiluk or Shlika. Shlika means bishul rav, a long time of cooking, more than the normal time of cooking, bishul meruba, Shlika. Next, Hakohen notelas hazroa. Okay, now we're up to the zroa, right? And that's the part of the aisle that's minaberech, from the thigh ad ha'etzem, right? The etzem is the bone that connects the regel to the body. Okay, so I think that this is what we call the knee. So it's from the thigh to the knee. That's called the zroa. B'shela. The zroa of the aisle has to be cooked. Mina aisle, and this is the aisle of Shlomim. And now we're going to do what's called tnufa. And we'll see this in the pasuk, which I hope he quotes here, but I don't know. Oh yeah. The pasuk says, okay, fine. Anyway, so he takes the zroa b'shelah min ha'ayil, chala matzah achas min asal. So there's a basket of matzos that are required. It's a chovas gavra on the Nazir to bring this sal of matzos. So he takes out one chalas matzah from the sal, urikik matzah achas. So this Nazir, again, he now bitaroso, he's got to bring with his karbonos 6 esronos, shnei shlishi sarn soles. And with this massive amount of volume of soles, he bakes 10 chalos matzos and 10 rikike matzos. So he doesn't tell you here in the footnote exactly how rikikim are different than chalos. But we'll get to that in Mitzvah tomorrow, I think. But v'nosein al kape hanazir, and he puts all this zroa b'shela b'ayil, minayil, and one challah of matzah, another challah of rakik, and the whole ganze business, the Kohen puts al kape hanazir on the extended palms of the Nazir, nifam, and the Kohen puts his hands underneath the hands of the Nazir and does tnufa. That's called molech mevi. Mala umorid. So the word molech here, in this context, means to extend it outwards, of far away from the guf, and mevi means to take it back towards his guf. Mila means he lifts it up, and morid means he lowers it down. And this will complete the process of tnufa, and v'achkach hutar nazir lishtos yainu l'tamel meis. That's going to be the ultimate matir. However, here on the top of Memvav, the Mishnah records the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kevan shenizrak olav echad min adamim, hutar nazir lishtos b'yayin l'tamel meis. We don't have to wait until the entire process of Tnufa. According to Reb Shimon, the heter of the Nazir, all his Isurim, is clinched with the Zrikas Adam of one of the various Karbanos. Because we said that any of the Karbanos, you remember, could be Matir. And Hutar Nazir Lishtos B'yayin L'tamel Meisa. Now, there's a Yerushalmi here that says that even the Tanakama would agree that immediately after Zrikas Adam, there's no longer an Isur Shtiyas Yayin. But he says that according to the Tanakama, there's a difference between the Isur Lav of Shtiyas Yayin and the Isur Eseh. The Pasuk says, V'achar Yishta Nazir Yayin. And that means that after the entire procedure of Tnufa, only then is the Nazir permitted to drink wine. Until that point, it's an Isur Eseh. And this leads us to the Gemara here on Daf Memvav and Aleph, which in Mirza Shem, Lineder will pick up tomorrow. Okay then, so if it's okay with you, same time tomorrow, and I'll see you then.